would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. If you'd like to get in contact with me, head on over to therebelbroker.com. From there, you can send along a message with any ideas, suggestions, observations, or questions that you might have. You can also toss your name into the hat for a possible win of a $50 Amazon gift card. We already gave away one in October and in November. We'll be doing it again in December. So head on over to therebelbroker.com, click the red button at the tippy top of the page that says take the survey to support the show. Use the same email address both times you're asked. Answer the handful of questions, and you are set. You are entered into the drawing, and good luck to everyone, and congratulations to the two folks who have won $50 each so far. And finally, if you'd like to join the Rebel Underground, just text the word Rebel Broker, all one word, to the number 44222. That's Rebel Broker to the number 44222, and you'll become a certified member of the Rebel Underground, which will get you access to content that I'm making exclusively for folks in the Rebel Underground. That can include great forms to use in terms of analyzing an investment. Whatever stuff I generate, those folks are going to get the absolute first crack at it. And you'll also get sort of the inside scoop on what's going on relating to the show and other content that I'm developing. So jump on in, join the Underground, text the word Rebel Broker to the number 44222 to make that happen. Today's show is kind of a first step, I think, towards trying to help people get that first thing done. And I thought it would be a good one to hit. There was an interesting article that got posted by the folks at Bigger Pocket relating to getting that first deal going, potentially a duplex, doing it through FHA financing. And we've talked about this before. We've talked about, instead of jumping in with single family residential, jumping in with something where you're blending that home purchase for you with an investment so that you have some segment of that that's working for you. And I thought it would be good also to discuss. We're going to go through it. We're going to cover their article and see what they have to say. But I thought it would also be helpful to get an idea of the broader spectrum. A lot of this is being fueled by a recent, time-wasting thing I've been doing lately, and that's looking at bad tenant videos on YouTube, where it's landlords that are recording the aftermath of a rented home that was not very well taken care of by their tenants. And this isn't unique. This isn't unique to any specific kind of real estate. And I make the argument that your best way to prevent that is to have a very strong tenant screening process. And we've talked about that a little bit before. But it's also important to note that in my experience with investors I've worked with in the past, in terms of, and this has very little to do with my hands-on experience with something they were doing. These are typically stories that they've shared with me because I don't do property management. So whenever I have an investor client, I love listening to their stories about their experiences as a landlord. And it really brings into sharp focus some concepts that you may want to consider. And I'm slowly being, I guess, seduced by the idea of going with multiple unit purchases. The idea of having a duplex or a triplex or a quad or even bigger actually kind of feels good to me for the reason of diversification. Instead of having my income for one bigger property just really wrapped up in one property. So when there's a vacancy in that property, my cash flow is much more dramatically affected, right? And I'm sure these are conversations you've had with yourself in your brain. If you're more diversified, if you've got a larger number of properties or a larger number of housing units, right? So a duplex has 2, a triplex has 3, a quad has 4. Then that way, when one is empty, you're still getting income from those other holdings. And I know plenty of folks who swear by single family residential. They would much rather buy multiple single family residential homes than do duplexes and triplexes or more. And for reasons that I think make sense when I hear them talk about it, and a lot of them refer to the quality of the tenant. And I'm not 100%. I usually like to share with you things that I have more of a firm opinion on. But after talking with a variety of different investors and seeing a variety of different stories online, the critical component really does seem to be your filtering. And part of that process also needs to be understanding where your properties are located. You're going to get a certain kind of renter in various kinds of parts of town, right? You're going to get folks, if you buy a property that's next to all kinds of neglected properties and properties that are getting beat up, the odds are that the person who's going to want to live in a neighborhood like that or is okay with living in a neighborhood like that is likely going to be that same kind of tenant. So it's important to understand that you may end up, because of where you purchase your investment property, find yourself linking the quality of your tenant to the area that you've purchased in. And I don't think that's a huge mystery. That seems like just sort of a logic thing. But what a lot of investors have told me in the past, and I get two completely opposing opinions. I've talked to past clients who just do single family residential for that very reason. They simply believe that they tend to get a better selection of tenants who have a better history and then treat their home better when they're only dealing with single family residential homes. Now, if you go up on YouTube, you're going to find plenty of videos that show single family residential homes that look good. We're not talking about homes that would be considered in a neighborhood that would lend itself to that. But if you look at the videos, you can see originally it was a nice property, but boy, did it get beaten up by its tenants. And in one case, it was clear that the tenants had all gotten arrested. The police had busted in, and they apparently were doing something. Given what was on the floor, I'm guessing they were growing marijuana in the house, which actually brings up another point as a landlord of being more aware of what's going on in your properties. But I've also then talked to investors who solely do multiple units, so duplexes, triplexes, and bigger, and swear by it. And I guess what I find myself thinking is that it comes down to you focusing on improving your tenant screening skills. And I actually want to do a show exclusively on that subject of screening your tenants and sharing with you some of the resources that you can use to screen tenants. There's several of them out there. Several of them seem to be ranked a little bit better, sound like they're a little bit better, but they can give you a fairly good background check that should not be all you rely on. So we'll sort of leave that topic to one side, and we'll cover that down the road a little bit. But as I move through my investment strategy, and I think one thing that brought this home is I had a tenant in my property in Hawaii recently who was the first one to do anything that I would categorize as abuse, to the point where I'm considering withholding their security deposit. And so it got me just wondering, in terms of those kinds of things. The last time I rented properties, it was a single family residential home. I had no trouble whatsoever, except for in terms of severe damage. But for whatever bizarre reason, when I came back and reviewed the home after the tenants had moved out, Ethernet cable had been disconnected, not taken, just ripped out. Shower heads were missing, a lot of bizarre stuff, and damage to a counter. So in the big spectrum of things that could go wrong, I consider myself to have gotten off lucky. But these are all things that we need to manage as folks who are thinking about being landlords and figuring out, how do we minimize this stuff, and how do we know about it as soon as possible? And then how do we write our lease agreements so that we are as protected as possible? So again, stuff for another show. Today, what I want to talk about is the subject of this article, which is getting that first transaction. And I actually think that doing a duplex or doing any multi-unit property where you're going to live in one of the units may be the perfect way to start down the road of becoming a real estate investor and a landlord. And there's a variety of reasons for that suggestion. One is you're able to take advantage of the fact that you're going to have one of these as your residence, so you can get financing that isn't really available when you're buying something that you're not going to be living in. Second, by simply doing a duplex, the odds are you're going to know what's going on with your renter. When weird stuff starts happening in terms of the number of people being in the home or odd occurrences, you're going to be very aware of that. The downside is they will know where you live. You will be living right next door to them. And one of the first rules of being a landlord is never let your tenant know where you live. That's something else that I've learned over the years from other folks. So it blends some good and some bad, but it could absolutely be a great learning experience for you. And one suggestion I got from an investor, when they first started out, this is what they did. They bought a duplex and they rented out the one next door. They lived next to those folks, and those folks never knew that they were the owners of the duplex. They thought they were renting the other side. And this investor did that by engaging a property management firm to handle some of the management, to being the people that these folks talked to. So that way they could keep an eye on what was going on. They could reach out to the property management firm and have the property management firm take care of any issues. And then these folks would never know that they were the owners. So there's ways to mitigate these various issues. But I still think that from a standpoint of getting started, that first foot in the door, the duplex is probably an exceptionally good option for you. And here's another reason why I think it's a good option. The return on investment after the fact tends to be better. By after the fact, I mean at some point you decide to move on. You're going to do another investment property. Maybe you're going to do another duplex. You're going to finance it the same way, but you're not going to sell the one you're in. You're going to rent the side of the duplex that you're currently living in, and you're going to move into a new place. And that's a great leapfrog way to just build your holdings in real estate. But what's great about that is that now your multiplier in terms of how much you're making is greater, right? So for instance, I can go out and I can purchase a duplex right now. I can do, typically the duplexes I'm seeing are 2-bed, 2-bath on each side. And while again, those aren't one of the ideals that I've talked about in the past in terms of desirability, I'd much rather have a 3-bedroom on one side, a 3-bedroom on the other side. Those are far less common. But once everything is said and done, the amount of rent that you're earning on those versus the amount of money you've spent, at least in my marketplace, gives you much greater return on investment. So and in terms of risk, in terms of worrying about what I discussed a moment ago about potentially still being able to draw in the highest quality tenants, I think a duplex is a very safe place to be. It gets a little bit more different. Things start feeling a little bit more like an apartment type of thing once you get up to triplexes and quads and then 5 or more, which are categorized in a completely different way of looking at things from a legal standpoint, at least here in California. So let's jump in here. Most people wanting to get into, then we're quoting from the article now, most people wanting to get into investing start by buying a house with an owner-occupied loan, FHA, VA, conventional. Owner-occupied loans are cheaper because they have lower interest rates and much lower down payments than investment loans. It's also the most affordable way to go when you have little cash. Keep in mind, you have to occupy the home for at least a year with an owner-occupied loan, or you'll be committing fraud. We've talked about that before. So what you can do is you can get this type of loan for this kind of property, and as long as you stayed in for a year, you can just keep repeating that process and acquiring more properties. Now, there is an exception to that. While you can technically do this every year, you need to, and this isn't true everywhere. For instance, the loan that I am working on with Quicken Loans doesn't require me to have 1 year of rental landlord experience prior to doing anything. The no experience was required at all. Now, I've got sort of landlord experience, I guess, with the vacation rental in Hawaii. But the point here is that first, you need to own 30% of the property at the time that you rent it out. you can't get another loan until you have 2 years of landlord experience with that home appearing on your taxes. So in other words, the very first time you jump through this hoop, you may have to wait 3 years. I have already come across instruments where this would not be a requirement. All you'd need to have is a signed rental agreement for the part of the unit that you're going to be leaving before escrow to close. So your mileage may vary. This article is pointing out that you're going to have to wait 3 years on these scenarios, and that is not necessarily true. I've come across loan products that permit this as long as I have a renter on queue who's signed a rental agreement. So you're going to want to check for yourself and see what kind of financing you can arrange for your first deal. So now that applies to a single family residential home where you own at least 30% of the property. And we're talking about how much you owe on it. Now let's talk about a way to get around that problem. And that's where the duplex comes in. Duplex are almost always cheaper, I'm quoting the article now, and bring in more rental income than single-family homes of the same size. If you plan on investing, it's a good idea to start with a duplex anyway, and we kind of already talked about that. The return on investment is higher on a duplex in terms of how much money you have committed to the transaction. Continuing to read from the article, FHA is the only owner-occupied loan you can get for a duplex that will allow a low down payment, 3.5% as of March 2015, that doesn't require landlord experience, and that will count the future rental income from the other half of the duplex to help you qualify for a loan. Yes, you will be able to buy more than you can afford because you can rent the other side. How awesome is that? So not only are you able to take advantage of some aggressive lending policies that'll let you get out with as little money out of your pocket as possible, but because of the ability to calculate in the rent you'll be bringing in from the other side of the duplex, you'll actually boost the amount of loan you can get. So in those situations, my suggestion is that you pay very close attention to your numbers. You want to make sure all this stuff works out. I'm not a guy who believes in ridiculous amount of leveraging simply because I guess a little bit of a scare was thrown into me with the last one. And the folks who made it out best are the folks who were the least leveraged in terms of the amount of money they owed on various properties. So that's something else to keep in mind. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about this a little more, but stay right there. We're going to take a little bit of a break. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. We're kind of running down a basic scenario here that would make a great first investment, and that is a FHA-financed duplex. Now, FHA doesn't necessarily have to be where you go with this. This would be an extremely inexpensive way in terms of the cost of the loan. Conventional loans will work just fine, but either way, you're going to find yourself in a position where with a duplex, you're going to get a better return on investment normally than buying a single-family residential home of the same square footage in the same area. And plus, you're diversifying it. If you do end up ultimately moving out and renting both sides, if one becomes vacant, you're still making money from the other. Now, let's go ahead and run through some of the other interesting bits of data from this article from Bigger Pockets, which, of course, I'll have a link to the article included in the show notes, so make sure to head on over to therebelbroker.com to check those out for yourself. Now, you'll be able to buy more going this route. You'll also gain the 2 years landlord experience that you need to buy the next property. And the reason you need 2 years experience running that house is because they need to see how much you get in rent to be able to use that as income when you want to buy another house. Now, again, I'd shop around for instruments. I think what they're specifically talking about here are FHA style loans, and that may absolutely be true for that. The loan I'm talking about that I was offered is not an FHA loan. Less than 2 years experience, and they won't count your rent as income, and you'll have to qualify for both homes at the same time to buy the second property. Now, when you do decide to move after those 2 years, all you need to do is get a lease on the half you are moving out of, which is pretty typical and is also part of the loan package I was shopping for, and then turn that into your lender so that they have it. You'll then be able to use 75% of the total rental income to qualify for the next loan. Now, here's a tip. You will want to normally have a 25% difference between your mortgage and what you can have come in as for rent. And that's basically so that the 75% they're counting all goes towards your qualifying for that next loan. The surplus extra would be added to your income and help you buy the next property. If it's a deficit, they'll take that amount away from your total income, and it would hurt you in buying that next property. The 25% rule that I just mentioned, you want to try to make 25% more than the mortgage every month so the house doesn't count against you when you get that next loan. So remember, anything under 25%, and what you'll find is that they're calculating it from that 75% number. So if there's not that much, it actually counts a little bit will count against you. So it's just a way of making sure that it's a solid, positive contribution to your next purchase. Now, the lender in this case will also require that you have 6 months of mortgage payments saved up as a safety net before you buy the next place. That's a good thing to have happening anyway. I mean, I think it's smart for you to have 6 months of mortgage payments in the bank, but this is required. So it's something that you'd have to make sure you've got. So make sure you've got that overhead amount rattling around in your brain so that you don't forget that that's something you're going to have to come up with as well in terms of cash reserve. As the folks at Bigger Pockets put it at the end, if you buy a duplex with an FHA loan, you can buy more houses, use rental income from the other side when you buy it, and after 2 years of living there, you meet the owner-occupied requirement and the 2 years experience. If the rental income after you move out is 25% more than the mortgage, you will be in a much better position for buying the next one. Again, it's going to be one of those scenarios where knowing your ground truth is going to be dramatically important. Because remember, leading off to this suggestion from the folks at Bigger Pockets, we batted around the idea that there may be some other risks associated with multiple unit purchases. Now, I love the idea of leveraging ROI. If I can make more ROI with the same amount of money, I'm jazzed to do that. I've always leaned a little bit more towards focusing on single-family residential style homes, but I've worked with clients who exclusively do duplexes and greater, and they do exceptionally well. But it does remind us that the important part of this process is what we do before we make commitments. Just like we've talked about that initial commitment with purchasing a home, the writing of the contract. You need to make sure you're doing that correctly. Just as you would if you're entering into a contract with a tenant, you need to make sure that you're doing everything correctly. And in that case, it's not just a question of whether or not they fill out an application. It should be you're checking out their background. You're getting a criminal check. You're getting a eviction check. You're finding out their employment history. You are calling past employers. You are calling past landlords. You are setting written down exactly how many people are going to be living in this home, what is and isn't acceptable on your property, how frequently you can visit the property or do a check on the property. You don't want to be too overbearing. I mean, these folks deserve their privacy. They're paying you a rent to enjoy the home, but you also need to protect your investment as much as you can. And I'll tell you, nothing will put the fear of horrible things in your mind than just doing a quick search on YouTube of bad tenants. And it's one of those things that I'll probably do a YouTube video on just to sort of do commentary on some of these, just to bring down the lightning so you can kind of see how bad things can get. But turn your eyes this direction. If you're someone in my area and you'd like to start getting search results for duplexes, let me know. Duplexes are bigger. Send me a note. Or if you're someone not even in the area and you just love to hear what's going on with duplexes or other properties that are in my area, just let me know. I'll be happy to set you up with an automated search that you can either get daily, weekly, on whatever frequency you'd prefer. But just to get an idea of what kind of investment opportunities there are in my area. And right now, in terms of duplexes, I'm seeing the greatest opportunities in Gilroy, which wouldn't be my very first choice of places to buy. I think, again, it's what you need to know the ground truth of Gilroy in order to buy wisely there. I'm all about trying to dig up a duplex north of me in San Jose or in Morgan Hill, but I just don't see that many duplexes down here. And it's interesting to then do the math. In some areas, you can find yourself a $700,000, $800,000 duplex, and obviously that's a ridiculous amount of money. But then when you look at single-family residential homes in the area of the same square footage, you find you're paying less than you would for some of those. But if I was to turn on and then rent, I would be making much more money on the duplex renting both than I would off of just doing a single family residential after all expenses are calculated in. So it's interesting, fascinating stuff. It's a great way to build. And after kind of doing a survey of a lot of investors that I respect, going multiple unit is absolutely the turning point between becoming sort of a casual landlord / real estate investor to having a strategy that ridiculously builds your inventory and completely turns around the amount of return that you're getting on your investment. So keep all that stuff in mind. I hope I have fueled some interesting thoughts. I do appreciate that you choose to spend your valuable time with me, and I hope that stuff like this is a valuable return on your investment. Thanks again for listening, everybody, and I'll talk to y'all next time.